Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ, and we are going to be going back to the Napoleonic era. The last two Tuesdays we covered the exploits of Napoleon III with his war with, Austria for the Italian independence, and then next with the Franco-Prussian War, which so yes, we are now back to the Napoleonic era with Napoleon the First. So I got this recommendation, to cover the war aims of each nation in the Napoleonic Wars. I think it'll be more interesting to see what everyone wanted. This covers the year 1804 through 1807, and, I guess it'll be interesting, because I always kind of was just assumed everyone just hates Napoleon. Everyone wants him gone, which is true. And I was always under the impression it's because Napoleon disrupted the social order of things. Basically Europe had established nations, had established, the monarchy is the top, and certain people couldn't rise above certain places. Napoleon rose through everything. The revolution gave him the opportunity to become an upstart, and rise from relative, a lowly position to becoming the master of all of Europe. So it's always like, oh, we hate this guy. We hate the fact what he represents. We hate the ideals of the revolution. So putting him down. And I do think that is kind of what they wanted, because as we saw, the moment Napoleon was defeated, they reestablished the old Bourbon monarchy. So while I do think there is that overall goal of hating Napoleon, wanting him gone, wanting to put back the old balance of power, the old status quo, I'm wondering if old Britannia will go into more specifics of what each nation wants in addition to that. So again, I've never watched an old Britannia video. I'm not entirely sure what to expect, but I think it's time to start trying new things. Because, for now, Historia Civilis, Kings and Generals, Epic History, History March, kind of have my channel in a chokehold. That they're the main guys we're covering. So it's interesting to jump around, kind of watch other historical YouTubers, and just, broaden the horizon, I suppose, of history, and my learning of history. So, yeah, I suppose we ought to get right into it. If you want to watch the original video, the link is down below. With that said, without any further ado, let us watch the war aims of each nation in the Napoleonic Wars, 1804 through 1807.
Between 1803 and 1815, the Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe. For much of this period, the French Emperor was the master of the continent, able to inflict his often arbitrary whims upon countries almost at will. Yet even he was never able to achieve all of his aims, and his plans were ultimately cut short by defeat. This video then will look at Napoleon's overall goals, as well as those of the major powers involved in the coalitions that fought against him. The French Empire of Napoleon held two overarching goals throughout the decade of warfare that followed his coronation: the consolidation of House Bonaparte on the throne of France, and the attainment of glory for Napoleon himself. All other considerations were simply afterthoughts. Of course, the practicalities of accomplishing these aims meant the creation of a more substantial policy. Napoleon himself first and foremost believed his continued position as emperor depended on military success. War had given him the throne.
Completely agreed. I mentioned this a lot in the Epic History TV telling of Napoleon, but Napoleon's entire thing is might makes right. He rose solely based on his military prowess and strength. And as we saw, the moment he lost that after the Russian invasion, everyone jumped on him. Napoleon's entire claim to power was his might, and he needed to keep that up, right? Because, most of Europe would never accept him. They just viewed him as some upstart nobody now playing the monarch game. So, yeah, essentially he did need to keep his military might as strong as possible, you know?
War would keep him there. This is not to say conflict was an aim in and of itself. He wanted peace, but on his terms. The drive to attain this success would push him into ever greater commitments. The most basic war aim throughout all of the coalitions was the preservation of France's natural borders, extending to the Rhine, which Napoleon had sworn to defend at his coronation. Expanding out from this, he was likewise determined from the start to maintain his Italian client state, the crown of which he had also recently taken. Italy was not held just for the sake of power and prestige, though these were factors. It also played an important economic role, serving as a key market, for example, for the Lyon textile industry, a town which because of this would become firmly Bonapartist. There were plans to eventually unify much of Italy under this single client kingdom, but they were never particularly advanced. Securing the Bonaparte dynasty, in Napoleon's mind, involved elevating his siblings as well. Thrones were given to Louis, Jerome and Joseph, whilst his sisters were created nobility of differing status. Today this seems like gross nepotism, and it was, made worse by the fact most were complete incompetents that often
Okay, Nick, but you know, I did mention this when we were watching the Napoleon series, that I was like, when I was kind of talking about some of the things that I thought that were kind of not good about Napoleon, I thought his nepotism, I always kept bringing up his nepotism, like, yeah, his nepotism seems to not be a good thing, and again, I don't know exactly how each of his family he put in positions, or his friends, how exactly they did. I'm under the assumption that they were mainly under Napoleon's thumb, and that he was kind of working through them, but, again, I probably shouldn't judge all of them, because I don't know exactly how they all ruled whatever they gave Napoleon, but, I don't know, just the nepotism, I wasn't, like, for. I thought it wasn't good, and yeah, overall, yeah. I'm just not a fan of nepotism in general. So that's probably one of the points I probably didn't fully agree with Napoleon on. Though I do see what he was trying to accomplish, essentially strengthening his dynasty and his extended reach in areas, you know, so, yeah.
Defied their patron. However, in the context of early 19th incompetence, like gross often defied their patron, made worse by the fact most were complete incompetents that often defied their patron. However, in the context of early 19th century France, explained here by Michael Bros, sharing public successes with one's family was actually expected rather than discouraged. Although Napoleon had largely given up on ambitions for a French colonial empire by the start of the war in 1803, he continued to see the only non-continental great power, Britain, as his ultimate adversary. What Napoleon intended to do with Britain, should he have ever been able to cross the Channel, never amounted to more than vague musings. "I shall be another William," he once theatrically declared, although his
William the Conqueror? Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, that is something I kind of always wanted to think about. Like, if Napoleon could somehow land his army in Britain, but then there would be a completely new issue of actually conquering it all and facing the British army, and just there's so much that could go on there. And like, how would he subdue them, and would he have to essentially occupy it? Because he couldn't just leave it, right? Like, there's a lot to that, I think, you know?
Comments in 1815, after the British Foreign Secretary Castlereagh had shown magnanimity towards France, and not those of a man who ever intended to act as a liberator. An invasion and decisive defeat of Britain was never a serious possibility, thus some sort of compromise peace was the only other option. Various feelers were put out by both sides, but ultimately Napoleon's demands in all of these, such as his offer in 1812, were that Britain should recognise his conquests and accept French continental hegemony. Hopes of defeating Britain led Napoleon into convoluted and counterproductive economic plans like the continental system, a European...
Yeah, you know, I think the continental system might be the biggest mistake Napoleon ever made. I know we usually say the Russian and the Spanish invasion, but a lot of that was set in motion because of the continental system, I think. Him and his obsession with defeating Britain, led to creating that and creating a lot more problems. And I just don't think it was possible, even with the great speed and might of the Grand Armée, enforcing every other nation to adhere to it. It's just not. I don't think it was ever fully possible. And we see what he tried to do with when Russia turned from it, and then how awful that whole ordeal went. So, yeah, I think the best thing Napoleon could have done is just accept that the British are never going to make peace with him and not try to undermine them economically. I know that sounds stupid, right? But it's just like him in his effort to try to undermine them usually resulted in disasters in the long run. So he probably should have just focused on consolidating his strength in mainland Europe and just kind of accepting that Britain, they're not going down. Like, he can't touch them. He just has to focus on his own power. I don't know. That's what I think.
Wide embargo on British goods, routinely violated by even his own family members such as Louis in the Netherlands. This aim of defeating Britain was to ostensibly drive much of his continental expansion. Many of his annexations, whether it be the Illyrian provinces, the Netherlands or the North German coast, were done on an ad hoc basis to try and enforce this convoluted system. He hoped to eventually force Britain to a fait accompli and break its economic hegemony, but as France could never hope to match Britain as an importer and exporter of goods, replacing London's economic power was never a serious possibility. Anywhere French armies conquered, not far behind followed the revolution. Borders were redrawn, sometimes along emerging notions of nationality, though more often than not arbitrarily, to achieve whatever Napoleon needed at that exact moment. The French administrative model, based on the Napoleonic Code, was rarely ever outright imposed on conquered nations, lest it create resistance among local populations and impede Napoleon's looting of the country. Thus, whilst exporting the French Revolution was indeed an aim, it would always take a back seat to other objectives. The Third Coalition was formed by Britain with Austria, Russia and Sweden. One historian sums up the aim of the coalition as restoring the balance of power, which Napoleon was upsetting. A more specific concern for the monarchies of Europe was Napoleon's seizure and execution of the Duke of Enghien, proving to those such as Tsar Alexander that the revolutionary leopard had not changed its spots. Despite this, actually dethroning Napoleon was not the main aim of any power in the Third Coalition. Containing aggressive French expansion, however, was. Austria at the start of the war clung to the corpse of the Holy Roman Empire, but even arch-conservative Francis could see its days were numbered no matter what the outcome of the conflict, and so had unified his disparate realms into a single Austrian empire. The Austrians were actually mainly concerned with their position in Italy during the war, and thus focused most of the troops there. Napoleon's coronation as King of Italy, as well as his meddling in Switzerland, were seen as major affronts to Habsburg prestige. Austria also harboured designs on Bavaria in the war, and French diplomats made great play of the fact the Habsburgs had threatened Bavaria with extinction 5 times since 1798, so as to draw the Wittelsbachs into the French camp. Russian aims were not really territorial either, but saw Napoleon as a destabilising influence that had to be contained. The Duke of Enghien had been lifted out from the territory of Alexander's father-in-law, and though the Tsar himself was not a devoted legitimist by any means, as Dominic Lieven says, Napoleon's treatment of Enghien was by no means the only example of the French leader's contempt for international treaties and norms. There was also again the classic fear of France's rapid expansion, particularly in Italy, which threatened Constantinople and Russia's interests in the Mediterranean. In this context, Alexander's hope was again to check French expansion. For Napoleon, the crushing victories at Ulm and Austerlitz in 1805 turned the war from one of survival to one of conquest. His gains in Italy were cemented and extended. French influence in Germany was formalised with the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine and formal dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. Naples and all southern Italy lay open to French armies. whilst Austria was delivered a humiliating check and forced to pay a large indemnity. The formation of a fourth coalition revolved.
Okay, so that was interesting. Overall, yes, there's a lot going on with Austria and Napoleon's um, rivalry. Austria and France's rivalry that began with, the revolution, Marie Antoinette, right? Well, I think she was Austrian. Her death, and then, Napoleon's successes in the first and second coalition. And obviously a lot of prestige, like he mentioned, the prestige were undermined by Napoleon and his expanding power. And there's all layers to that rivalry. And yeah, Russia, once again, I did not know about Napoleon's treatment of the Duke, but that obviously had a hand to play with Russia, because I always was under the impression Russia did. I always thought, like, yeah, why did Russia get involved? It's not like Napoleon directly threatened them, but it's more. And I was under the impression it was just Tsar Alexander seeking some glory, right? But it is cool to see that obviously he too was of the opinion of the French needing to be contained for also ideas of his own for the plans. So yes, it is interesting to see that.
Entirely around whether Prussia could finally be persuaded to take up the fight. Berlin had actually intended to in 1805, but the Prussian messenger delivering an ultimatum to Napoleon had instead been forced to offer him an impromptu message of congratulations upon hearing the news of Austerlitz. Prussia should have declared war earlier alongside the Austrians. There was genuine fear, however, of picking a side in Berlin. The Prussian king, Frederick William, was supine, and though...
But did he just say he was stupid? Wait, I'm sorry.
Picking a side in Berlin. The Prussian king, Frederick William, was supine, and though...
I don't think I heard that correctly. Okay, I'll look at it later. I won't keep replaying that. But yeah, Frederick William was is a man. So point is, I was kind of like reading up on him, and he wasn't for the idea of war. Like, when I was kind of looking up at him, he kind of had this weird little speech where he's like, I want to keep peace or something and not go to war, and then it was everyone else kind of pushing him a little to like war. And the famous idea goes that his wife really pushed him to fight Napoleon, and there was the idea of handing over or an area to the British that was previously promised to Prussia, so that also gave them an idea. Also, Napoleon's rapid influence in Germany with the Confederation of the Rhine also was another, I guess, insult or like kind of threat to Prussia. So yeah, all these factors, plus the peer pressure, really made Frederick William go to war. So yeah.
Queen Louise was a remarkably intelligent and capable woman that understood the need to contain France. Even she was hesitant about a premature declaration of war, believing it would lead to dependence on Russia. The result was dependence on...
Yeah, that's the thing about Prussia. It was really it was the smallest of the great powers. It was kind of sandwiched between Russia and France, and overall was, and look at its gains, weren't all completely unified. It was kind of spaced out. So yeah, there were issues there. Speaking of Queen Louise, I was reading about her, and wait. So, I was reading about her on this website called Heritage History. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but I was kind of interested in seeing it. And boy, did Napoleon, if what I read was correct, Napoleon was kind of a complete, like, jerk to her, but in, like, a really funny way. Napoleon's conduct when reading about this is hilarious. I think my favorite part is that she didn't want to meet with Napoleon because Napoleon was slandering her, like, through propaganda, and basically, like, really picking on her. And then she was forced to meet with him in hopes of negotiating a better idea for Prussia, and Napoleon is just a complete jerk to her. And then there's like something she tried, I forgot, it was somewhere around here. She was, wait, I'll find it. Yeah, so she tries to, like, at least with Mattingburg, to which Napoleon answered dryly, "Your Majesty will kindly remember that it is I who offer, and you who accept." I don't know why, but, like, reading about Napoleon being a total, like, he seems to have it out for this woman. Like, it's kind of funny. I would recommend reading it. I don't know how accurate it is, you know, I have to really check the source. But, like, it's a funny little thing, just how Napoleon dealt with fallen enemies. Almost like, yeah, treating them as lesser, or, like, he wasn't as kind, you know. I don't know. It was a funny thing. I'm sorry. But she is someone I read about, and yeah, a very interesting person.
On France instead in the wake of the Austrian defeat. Though Prussia claimed to be a great power, Napoleon treated her, as he did all states, as if she were his vassal. In 1804, Napoleon had had the British envoy to Hamburg, effectively under Frederick William's protection, kidnapped in a flagrant breach of international law. French troops had marched through Prussia's southern enclaves in 1805 with no cause. Napoleon regularly and publicly denounced Queen Louise, loved by the Prussian people, as a
Yeah, that's what I was saying. He was, like, making fun of her and, like, using propaganda to devalue her. It's like, he was essentially bullying her. It's like, I don't know why, it was just the funniest thing. I was like, whoa, Napoleon, it's funny.
Harlot. Worst of all, Prussia's influence in Germany was all but destroyed by the creation of the Confederation. Nonetheless, fear of war pulled Frederick William towards the French camp, with the Treaty of Schönbrunn in December 1805 committing him to a comprehensive alliance, as well as the annexation of the British King's fiefdom of Hanover. As always with Napoleon, appeasement led only to a new intensified round of bullying. The final straw was when, in August 1806, intercepts revealed Napoleon had been trying to arrange a peace with Britain by offering to return Hanover, although Prussia had long since abandoned.
You know, as we're talking about Napoleon's bullying of Prussia and just how rough he was, I kind of did mention that I think Napoleon is a great administrator. Oh, wait. Yeah, sorry, I just went to do something. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So, like, I think domestically, Napoleon is a great ruler, administrator. And I think he probably was the best government for the French people. I mean, if you're comparing him with the Directory, the Bourbon monarchy, the Jacobins especially, Napoleon is much better for the French people. But I think his weakest point is that I think in terms of his diplomacy and his dealing with foreign affairs and powers, I think personally he was kind of bad at it. Like, you know, and how he dealt with his allies, I think. Like, with Spain, you know, Napoleon didn't respect Spain. He viewed them as incompetent. He viewed them as a mess. So he kind of just usurps their government to make them a puppet state. And then he essentially alienates one of his only allies and turns them into an enemy, you know? And I think of his dealing with Russia, with, you know, him actually managing to form a somewhat friendly, you know, alliance with Tsar Alexander. But, you know, I think the reason his relationship with Russia fell off was a lot of his own doing, you know, insulting the Russians with the Duchy of Warsaw, basically ruining their economy with his continental system, Like, I was almost like, why would anyone want to be an ally of Napoleon? He like treats his allies awfully. He like damages his own allies. And I just think Napoleon isn't the best with diplomacy or foreign affairs. At least in regards to foreign affairs. Napoleon's diplomacy is, I'm gonna beat you up, and now you're gonna make concessions. I'm gonna act magnanimous, but you're making concessions, and it's on my terms after I've wrecked you, you know? That's Napoleon's. And I know we covered his entire thing is his military strength, and it's true. But, I think he definitely could have strengthened his diplomacy. He could have strengthened in the way he conducts himself with other powers, I think. Granted, a lot of them hated him. A lot of them probably never even wanted to, even if Napoleon put on the best face, the most respectful attitude. Maybe they still would have been his enemies, probably. But, I don't think he did himself any favors with how he treated his allies or other foreign powers, in my opinion, you know.
And any claim to dignity where dealing with Napoleon was concerned. This was finally an insult too far. An exasperated but still fearful Frederick William sent a letter demanding that Prussia's neutrality pact in the north of Germany be honoured. As Christopher Clark notes, even by Napoleon standards, the reply mixed a blend of arrogance, aggression, sarcasm and false solicitude. Prussia's main aim then, more than any territorial goal, was to simply restore the nation's honour. But instead of holding the line on the Elbe and awaiting Russian reinforcements,
Napoleon must have hated Prussia. Like, wait, let me get some of that. Wait, I haven't stopped because it's a lot to read. I want to stop and spend like 5 minutes reading all this. Just let me skim through it really quick. Yeah, Napoleon's very aggressive, ain't he? He must have hated Prussia. Like, he's awfully way more aggressive, and he punishes them even more. I think he punished them even more than Austria, like, at least in terms of what he took from their land. He shrunk them even smaller. Like, I'm surprised he didn't just completely destroy all of Prussia and just, you know, yeah. He must have really hated them. I don't know where this aggression came, you know? And then I think of, like, the Treaty of Tilsit, right? Where he essentially leaves out Frederick William. Frederick William is just there, but it's mainly between Alexander and Napoleon. So, yeah, Napoleon must have really disliked this nation for some reason.
Solicitude. Prussia's main aim then, more than any territorial goal, was to simply restore the nation's honour. But instead of holding the line on the Elbe and awaiting Russian reinforcements, Prussia instead took the offensive, and its well-drilled but brittle army was unable to match Napoleon's for speed and tenacity. The consequent destruction of Prussian forces at Jena and Auerstadt, and surrender of numerous well-supplied garrisons that gave up for no reason other than a lack of will, left Frederick William in an untenable position. French aims changed rapidly during this time. Saxony was offered peace so long as it was subsumed into the Confederation, with Napoleon going so far as to claim he had only entered the war to defend Saxon independence. After he had taken Berlin, Napoleon offered peace on the basis that Frederick William renounce all territories west of the Elbe. The Prussians signed an agreement to that effect on the 30th of October, but Napoleon then changed his mind and demanded Prussia serve as a basis for an offensive against Russia. This term was rejected, and the war continued until the French defeated the Russian army at Friedland in 1807. Napoleon then made clear he wanted to end hostilities with Russia amicably, and even hinted towards his wish for an alliance. Tsar Alexander thus, despite assurances to protect Prussia, met the French Emperor at the small town of Tilsit. Frederick William was nominally the equal of Alexander and Napoleon, but was in reality left almost entirely out of negotiations.
Yeah, just the disrespect, right? Napoleon. What did Prussia do to you, Napoleon? Why do you hate them so much? Right? Oh my goodness. He was more aggressive with them than I've seen in any other group, so yeah. And man, Prussia really got screwed throughout the Napoleonic Wars. Like, you know. And then Tsar Alexander basically abandons them to become homies with Napoleon for a bit. So that's hilarious.
Personal level, one cannot necessarily blame Napoleon. Frederick William was, to put it mildly, a pedantic bore. "You shall have to ask my tailor, sir," Napoleon snapped when the Prussian king tried to engage him in a particularly uninteresting conversation about his uniform's buttons. Napoleon later declared his greatest
Talking about dude's buttons. How do you talk about that? Yo, dude, those buttons are looking mighty nice. It's like, what? Oh, man. Poor Frederick William. Like, essentially gets, like, peer pressured into war that he apparently didn't want. At least from what I read. Loses so much land. Gets bullied by Napoleon. Yeah, he strikes me as a person who was kind of a pushover, Frederick William. I don't know everything about him, so maybe I'm not right in saying that, but yeah, I also think of like the Congress of like Vienna, or I think it was the Congress of Vienna, where Tsar Alexander kind of undermined the Prussian official by going directly to the king, and Frederick William, not even consulting his own advisor or diplomat, just kind of agrees with whatever Tsar Alexander says, his request. So, yeah, Frederick William, maybe he was a nice guy. I like to think he comes across as a nice guy, but yeah, it was kind of picked on a bit, huh?
Mistake was not destroying Prussia completely at Tilsit. "I'm sure Alexander would not have opposed it," he said. Prussia's actual fate was hardly much more generous. Frederick William had hoped to revive something like the previous offer of a border on the Elbe. To this end, he even invited his wife, Queen Louise, to try and charm Napoleon into concessions. Louise swallowed her pride and begged the emperor to spare Prussia. She in particular focused on the fortress city of Magdeburg, but Napoleon, who knew of its importance from reading Gustavus Adolphus's campaigns, was uninterested. The beautiful
Yeah, that's what we just said, huh? It's I who makes the offer and you who accepts, is what Napoleon apparently said. He really picked on this poor woman. And then she ended up, like, if you read further down, she's, like, crying because Napoleon's so mean. I'm surprised he didn't destroy Prussia. With how much he handicapped them and seemed to really be hostile, I am surprised Napoleon didn't just completely wreck Prussia, just end them, right? I wonder why. Well, either way, it came back to bite him in the butt, because Prussia played a part in Waterloo, his ultimate defeat, right? So, yeah.
"Beautiful Queen of Prussia really cries," he wrote to Berthier. "She believes I came all this way for her nice eyes." The final treaty saw Prussia stripped of half her territory and population, lose everything west of the Elbe, agree to pay a large indemnity, and allow French troops to occupy the country, along with the formation of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. This interesting creation of Napoleon's was seen by many as a precursor to a full revival of a Polish state, partitioned at the end of the 18th century. Napoleon openly encouraged these hopes, but in reality had no real interest in such a project. For one, because it would torpedo his newfound alliance with Russia. Neither France or Russia had started the Third Coalition with any serious territorial aspirations against each other, and this remained true at Tilsit, where Russia only agreed to give up the Ionian Islands. "The Vistula marks the borders between our empires," Napoleon declared before Tilsit. And indeed, this was largely a fact established by the treaties signed there. At Tilsit, Alexander forgot all previous war aims of containing French expansionism and became almost sycophantic towards Napoleon. Yet his instructions at the same time to Russian diplomats show a cool and realistic grasp of Russia's situation. In return for handing Europe over to French domination, he was given support for a war against Sweden, and a potential division of the Ottoman Empire was discussed. More importantly, he got a period of respite without the burden of an indemnity. The main concession made by Alexander was bowing to Napoleon's war aim of creating a unified economic front against Britain by roping Russia into the newly created continental system. For Napoleon, Tilsit achieved most of what he had wanted. Europe was now almost totally under his control, certainly not the original aim when the war first began, and his dynasty was secure. Indeed, his popularity in France, never overwhelming, probably reached its highest point in 1807. But Britain still needed to be defeated, and this quest to do so was to leave France broken and the Bonapartes dethroned.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was a very insightful but very fun video. I'm happy to have watched that. And yeah, just very interesting, I think, in just how Napoleon was dealing with everyone. Um so yeah, I'm wondering about watching some more. Either way, there will be more Napoleon content because I've decided for Tuesdays to devote every Tuesday to new Napoleon related content and videos. So yeah, there will be more. So with that said, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye everyone.